When a foster kid turns 18, the world doesn't throw a party. It hands you a trash bag for your belongings and shows you the door. For my sister Leah and me, it happened on a Tuesday in October, the air already tasting of frost and endings. What we did next was crazy, desperate, and the best decision we ever made. This is the story of how we bought an abandoned military bunker for $5, and what we found inside didn't just give us a future, it gave us back our past. If you've ever felt like you were completely on your own, like the world had forgotten you, then hit that subscribe button and stick with me. This story is for you. The door to the group home clicked shut with a sound so final it felt like a gunshot. A soft, oiled, suburban gunshot. One moment, we were standing in the beige hallway under the disapproving gaze of Carol, our foster mother for the last 2 years, and the next, we were on the curb. My duffel bag was heavy on my shoulder, containing every single thing I owned. 3 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book I'd read a dozen times, a toothbrush, and a folded piece of paper with my birth certificate. Leah stood beside me, smaller but somehow tougher, her jaw set. She had the same bag, the same sparse collection of a life. She was 16, technically still the system's problem, but she'd made it clear she was going wherever I was going. Carol had fought her on it for about 5 minutes before giving up with a sigh that said we were a lost cause anyway. We were a package deal, always had been. "Well," Leah said, her breath making a small white cloud in the chilly air. "Happy birthday, Leo." I forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Thanks." 18, the magic number, the age of freedom. It felt more like the age of free-falling. The street was quiet, lined with identical houses and perfectly manicured lawns. A dog barked somewhere. A car drove past, the driver not even glancing at the 2 kids sitting on their luggage on the edge of the sidewalk. We were invisible. We had been trained to be. Don't cause trouble, don't make noise, don't get attached. The rules of survival in the system. But the system was done with me now. I had aged out. It was a term that sounded like something you'd do with cheese, letting it sit in a dark room until it was ready. I didn't feel ready. I felt raw and exposed. We had $213 between us, my final allowance check and the cash Leah had saved from her part-time job at a diner, money she'd been hiding in her sock drawer. It felt like a fortune and nothing at all. Enough for a week in the cheapest motel we could find, maybe. Then what? The social worker had given me a pamphlet with a list of shelters and resources for transitional youth. The paper felt flimsy in my pocket, a bureaucratic apology for kicking a kid into the street. "So what's the plan?" Leah asked, pulling her thin jacket tighter. She never looked scared, but I could see it in the way she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, as if expecting an answer to appear over the rooftops. "First plan," I said, getting to my feet and shouldering my bag again. "We walk. We get away from this street before someone calls the cops on us for loitering." We walked until the perfect lawns gave way to cracked sidewalks and strip malls. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that felt too beautiful for the day we were having. Every step was a step into a terrifying unknown. The weight in my stomach wasn't just hunger. It was the heavy, leaden feeling of absolute loneliness. We weren't just homeless. We were rootless. We had no family, no one to call. Our parents were a ghost story, a file in a social services office we weren't allowed to read. We were born, they disappeared, the system swallowed us. End of story. Or so we thought. That first night we stayed in a shelter. A huge, echoing room, filled with rows of metal-framed bunk beds. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and quiet desperation. Leah lay in the bunk below me, and I could hear her trying to muffle her crying into her pillow. I stared up at the stained ceiling, listening to the symphony of coughing, snoring, and murmuring that filled the dark. I felt a cold, hard anger solidifying in my chest. Anger at Carol, at the system, at the whole world that could create a place like this and call it a solution. I promised myself, promised the silent, shaking form of my sister below me, that this would not be our life. We would not become permanent residents of this forgotten world. We deserved more. I just had no idea how we were going to get it. The next morning we left before sunrise, the meager breakfast of dry toast and weak coffee doing little to warm us. We found our way to the public library, a sanctuary of silence and free internet. It was there, huddled together in front of a flickering computer monitor, that our lives took the most unexpected turn imaginable. Leah was the one who found it. I was scrolling through job listings, each one requiring experience I didn't have, for pay that wouldn't even cover a room in a boarding house. Leah, ever the dreamer, was typing absurd things into the search bar. Private islands for sale, castles under $1,000, secret lairs. I was about to tell her to stop wasting time when she gasped, "Leo, look!" I leaned over. On the screen was a government surplus auction website. It was mostly filled with old office furniture, used vehicles, and confiscated electronics. But Leah had clicked on the real estate section. And there, nestled between a seized warehouse in Detroit and a patch of swampland in Florida, was a listing that made no sense. Lot 734, decommissioned Cold War communications bunker. Parcel 0.25 acres. Location, rural Custer County. And then the price. Starting bid, $1. Administrative fee, $5. It had to be a typo, a joke. I clicked on the details. There was one grainy black and white photo of a concrete square with a thick metal door set into the side of a grassy hill. It looked like a tomb. The description was sparse. Property sold as is, where is. Access via unimproved road. No utilities. Structure integrity not guaranteed. It was a quarter acre of nothing in the middle of nowhere with a concrete box buried in it. It was perfect. "No way," I breathed. "It can't be real." "It says the auction ends in 1 hour," Leah said, her eyes wide. "No one's bid on it. The starting bid is $1." We looked at each other. The idea was insane, utterly, certifiably crazy. We had $200 to our name. Buying a hole in the ground in a place we'd never even heard of was the single most irresponsible thing we could do. But the library was warm, and outside, the world was cold and indifferent. The shelter awaited us again that night. The pamphlet in my pocket felt heavier. What did we have to lose? A life of shelters and uncertainty? A future of being ground down by the system until we disappeared? "It's a quarter of an acre," Leah whispered, as if saying it louder would break the spell. "It would be ours, Leo. No one could ever kick us out, ever again." That was it. That was the phrase that sealed it. No one could ever kick us out. The dream of a place, any place that was ours. A place to put down a root, no matter how barren the soil. The anger from the night before came back, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just rage, it was fuel. This was our chance to take something back, to defy the world that had written us off. "Okay," I said, my heart pounding. "Let's do it." We used my new debit card, the one the foster agency had set up for my final payment. I typed in the numbers, my hand shaking slightly. We placed a bid for $1. Then we paid the $5 administrative fee. Total cost, $6. We sat there for the next hour, staring at the screen, watching the countdown timer tick away. My stomach was in knots. I expected someone, anyone, to swoop in at the last second and outbid us. But no one did. The timer hit 0. A message popped up on the screen. "Congratulations! You are the winning bidder for lot 734. We stared at the screen in stunned silence. We had just spent 6 of our last $200 on an abandoned bunker in the middle of nowhere. For a moment, the sheer stupidity of it washed over me. Then Leah started to laugh. A real, genuine laugh that echoed in the quiet library and earned us a stern look from the librarian. I couldn't help it. I started laughing too. It was the laugh of two people with nothing left to lose, who had just jumped off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. We owned a concrete box. We owned a piece of dirt. We were landowners. The confirmation email arrived a few hours later with a digital deed and GPS coordinates. It was real. Now we just had to get there. Custer County was over 400 miles away. A bus ticket for both of us cost $140. We bought them without hesitation. We spent our remaining cash on supplies: water bottles, protein bars, a couple of heavy-duty flashlights, and a cheap compass. We walked out of the city that afternoon with our duffel bags, our meager supplies, and a printout of a deed to a place we'd never seen. The bus ride was a long, surreal journey through the night. The city lights faded behind us, replaced by the endless darkness of the countryside. Leah fell asleep against my shoulder, her breathing steady and calm. She had a faith in this plan that I didn't fully share. My mind was racing. What if we couldn't find it? What if the door was sealed shut? What if the whole thing was a scam? I watched the dark shapes of trees and hills fly past the window, and for the first time since that door had clicked shut, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear or anger. It was a fragile, terrifying thing. It was hope. The bus let us off at dawn at a deserted crossroads. There was a gas station with a "closed" sign on the door and a single, rusty road sign pointing down a gravel lane. Custer County Line. That was it. No town, no people, just the wind whistling through the tall, dry grass. According to the GPS on my phone, our property was another 7 miles down that road. We adjusted our bags and started walking. The silence was immense. It was a living thing, broken only by the crunch of our footsteps on the gravel and the cry of a distant hawk. The sun climbed higher, and the landscape unfolded around us. Rolling hills, patches of dense forest, and wide-open fields. It was beautiful and intimidating. We were so completely alone. It took us nearly 3 hours of walking. My phone battery was dying, and a knot of anxiety was tightening in my chest. Then Leah pointed. "Leo, up there." On the side of a low, scrub-covered hill, almost perfectly camouflaged, was a flat patch of concrete, and in the center of it, a dark rectangle of steel. It was exactly like the photo. We scrambled up the hillside, our feet slipping on the loose dirt. The bunker. It was smaller than I'd imagined, the concrete slab no bigger than a parking space. The steel door was thick and imposing, with a large, rusted wheel in the center instead of a handle. There was no lock, just the wheel. "Well, here goes nothing," I said, grabbing the wheel with both hands. It wouldn't budge. It felt like it was fused to the door. I pulled with all my weight, my muscles straining. Nothing. Leah tried to help, both of us grunting and pulling until our hands were raw. Despair began to creep in. We had come all this way, spent all our money, for a box we couldn't even open. We were about to give up when I noticed a small, almost invisible lever near the hinge. It was stiff with rust. I kicked it. Once, twice. On the third kick, it moved with a loud crack. I grabbed the wheel again, gave it one last desperate heave, and with a deep, groaning screech of protesting metal, it began to turn. Inch by agonizing inch, we turned the wheel. With each turn, there was a loud clank from inside the door, like giant tumblers falling into place. Finally, with a heavy thud, the door swung inward about a foot, opening a sliver of pure, unadulterated darkness. A wave of cold, stale air washed over us, smelling of damp earth, rust, and something else. Time. It smelled like trapped time. We switched on our flashlights and pushed the heavy door open the rest of the way. The beams cut through the blackness, revealing a steep set of concrete stairs leading straight down. Hand in hand, we took the first step into our new home. The air grew colder with each step down. The flashlight beams danced across bare concrete walls, streaked with years of condensation. At the bottom of the stairs was a single room, maybe 15 by 20 feet. It was utterly empty, except for a series of metal racks bolted to one wall, and a tangle of thick cables that had been cut and frayed. Dust motes, thick as insects, swirled in our light. The silence in here was different from the silence outside. It was a heavy, pressurized silence that pushed in on you, making the sound of our own breathing seem deafeningly loud. This was it, a concrete box, a tomb. The hope that had carried me all this way began to evaporate, replaced by the cold, hard reality of our situation. We had bought an empty cement room in the middle of nowhere. The absurdity, the sheer folly of it all was crushing. "It's clean," Leah said, her voice small and wavering, trying so hard to find something positive. "It's empty, Leah," I said, the words tasting like defeat. "There's nothing here." We stood there for a long time, the beams of our flashlights tracing the empty corners of our new, useless kingdom. I felt the familiar sting of tears behind my eyes, the hot shame of failure. I had let her down. I had let us both down, chasing a stupid, impossible dream. I was about to suggest we just go, just walk away and leave this mistake behind, when Leah's foot scuffed against something on the floor. "What was that?" she asked. I aimed my light at her feet. In the center of the room, the concrete floor was perfectly smooth, except for one section. A square, about 3 feet by 3 feet, that had a slightly different texture. And in the middle of that square, almost invisible under the layer of dust, was a thin, dark line. A seam. It wasn't just a patch of concrete, it was a panel. My heart started pounding again, a frantic, desperate rhythm. I knelt down, brushing away the dust with my hands. There was no handle, no ring to pull. But on one edge, I found a tiny indentation, just big enough for my fingertips. I dug my fingers in and pulled. It was heavy, but it lifted. Underneath the concrete panel was a dark, hollow space, and nestled inside that space was a large green metal footlocker, the kind the military uses. It was old, with rust speckling its corners, but it was solid, and on the front it had 2 heavy latches. They weren't locked. With trembling hands, I reached down and flipped them open. The sound echoed in the small room. I lifted the lid. Inside, it was packed to the brim. But it wasn't what I expected. No gold bars, no stacks of cash, no weapons. It was filled with objects that seemed far more personal. There were dozens of thick, leather-bound journals, their pages filled with dense, neat handwriting. There were stacks of cassette tapes, each one carefully labeled with a date. There was a small, portable cassette player, the kind that was popular decades ago, with a fresh set of batteries still in their plastic packaging right beside it. And on top of it all was a thick manila envelope, sealed with wax. Our names, Leo and Leah, were written on the front in that same neat, unfamiliar script. We lifted the envelope out. It felt impossibly heavy. Who had done this? Who knew our names? Who had hidden this box here for us to find? It didn't make any sense. We were orphans, nobodies. No one was looking out for us. No one had ever been looking out for us. The system had been very clear on that. We had no one. Listen, if you've made it this far into our story, thank you. You're here with us in this cold, dark room, about to open an envelope that will change the entire world as we know it. This was the moment where everything we thought was true was about to be turned upside down. And I know some of you listening might be facing your own locked boxes. Maybe it's a difficult conversation you need to have, a past you need to confront, or a future you're terrified to step into. I want you to know you're not alone in that fear. If this is hitting you, if you feel that, I want you to drop a comment below. Just write, "I'm ready to find the key." You don't have to explain anything else. This community we're building here, it's a place where we can stand in front of those locked doors together. We'll hold that space for you. Now, let's get back to the bunker. Let's open this envelope. My fingers were clumsy as I broke the wax seal and opened the flap. Inside, there were several documents. A formal, official-looking deed to this very property. Parcel 0.25 acres, Custer County. But this one was different from our digital copy. This one was signed over, not from the U.S. government, but from a man named Arthur Vance to Leo and Leah Vance. Our names, our last name. We'd never known it. In the system, we were just Leo and Leah. No last name attached, as if we'd sprung from the earth. Vance. And there was a letter, several pages long, written on heavy, yellowed paper. I pulled it out, and my flashlight beam fell on the first line. "My dearest grandchildren," it began. Leah and I just looked at each other, our faces pale in the harsh light. Grandchildren. The word was alien. We had been told explicitly that all our relatives were deceased, that we were utterly alone. It was the foundational story of our lives. I took a deep breath and began to read the letter aloud, my voice shaking and echoing in the concrete room. The letter was from our grandfather, Arthur Vance. He wrote that he wasn't dead, not when he wrote this anyway, but that he was dying. He had worked for the government for 30 years as a signals intelligence technician, a quiet job in a quiet corner of the Cold War. He said our parents had been good people, but lost, troubled. He knew they weren't capable of raising us, and he knew that when they disappeared, we would be taken by the state. He was already sick by then, an aggressive cancer caused by chemical exposure at one of his old posts. He couldn't pass the physicals or the psychological screenings to become our legal guardian. The system wouldn't have let him. They would have seen a dying old man as an unfit parent. So he made a different plan. He couldn't save us from the system, but he could build us a lifeboat. He used his life savings to buy this small, forgotten parcel of government land. He built this bunker himself, officially listed as a private storm shelter, using his old connections to get the permits. He designed it as a fail-safe, a place of last resort for us. He researched obscure property laws and found a loophole. By deeding it back to the government with a specific, little-known covenant, it would be declared surplus after 15 years and put up for auction for a nominal fee. He was gambling, a wild, desperate gamble, that one day, when we were old enough and desperate enough, we might find it. He had left a trail, a series of digital breadcrumbs he hoped a future version of us might be able to follow. Hints planted in public records that he prayed we'd someday have the right to access. But it seemed we had found it just by dumb luck. Or maybe, he wrote, there was no such thing. This place, this concrete box, wasn't an empty tomb. It was a sanctuary, a final gift from a man we never knew, a man who had loved us. He had been watching over us in the only way he could. The weight of that love, reaching out across the years from beyond the grave, was staggering. It broke something open inside me. All the years of feeling unwanted, discarded, like human refuse. It was all a lie. We were not forgotten. We were loved. We were protected. I finished reading the last page, and the silence that followed was thick with emotion. Leah had tears streaming down her face, but she wasn't making a sound. I was crying too, hot, silent tears that dripped from my chin onto the yellowed paper. I cried for the man we never got to meet. I cried for the years we had spent believing we were alone. I cried for the children we had been, lost and scared in a system that saw us as case numbers. And I cried with a sense of profound, earth-shattering relief. Our story didn't start with abandonment. It started with a fierce, desperate act of love. Leah finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion. He was real, Leo. We had a grandfather. He was real. We spent the next hour just sitting on the floor of the bunker, passing the letter back and forth, reading it again and again, as if the ink might fade. We were trying to absorb the truth of it, to stitch this new reality over the scar tissue of our old one. The anger came next. A white-hot rage at the social workers, the foster parents, the entire faceless system that had told us we had no one. It was easier for them that way. No family to track down, no relatives to fight for custody. Just two clean slates they could file away. They had stolen our family from us. They had stolen our name. But as the anger cooled, it left something else in its place. Purpose. Our grandfather's letter wasn't finished. There was more. He wrote that this bunker contained two possible futures for us. He called them the escape hatch and the long road home. The escape hatch was simple. He had left us a key to a safety deposit box in a small bank in a nearby town. Inside, he wrote, was enough cash for us to disappear. To buy a used car, drive to a new state, get an apartment, and start over completely. No one would ever have to know who we were. It was a clean break, a chance at a normal life, bought and paid for by his sacrifice. Then there was the long road home. He wrote that his illness wasn't an accident. It was the result of illegal chemical dumping by a private contractor, a company called Northfield Development, at the military base where he had been stationed for years. They had poisoned the groundwater. Dozens of his colleagues had gotten sick and died, all written off as isolated tragedies. He had spent the last years of his life gathering evidence, memos, soil sample results, internal corporate documents he had managed to copy. All of it was here, in this footlocker. The journals documented everything. The cassette tapes were recordings of conversations he'd had with other sick workers, with corporate reps who had lied to them. It was a lifetime of proof. Northfield Development, he wrote, was now a massive real estate corporation. And they were in the process of buying up all the land in this very county, planning to build a luxury resort. His letter warned us that our tiny parcel was likely one of the last independent holdouts. He gave us a choice. We could take the key, take the money, and run. Or we could use the evidence he had gathered to fight them, to get justice for him and for all the other families they had destroyed. He warned us that fighting would be dangerous. Northfield was powerful. They would not hesitate to crush two homeless kids who got in their way. He said he wouldn't blame us if we chose to run. He just wanted us to be safe. But he hoped, he wrote, that we would choose to fight. Inheritance isn't just about what you're given, the last line of the letter read. It's about what you do with it. The weight of that choice settled over us, heavier than the concrete roof above our heads. Safety or justice? A new life or a righteous fight? Leah, my practical, cautious sister, was the first to speak. "We should take the money, Leo," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "We take the money and we go. We find a small town somewhere, get jobs. I can finish high school. We can be normal."
Isn't that what we've always wanted?
I looked at her, and I saw the appeal, the deep, seductive pull of an easy life. A life without fighting. A life where we weren't looking over our shoulders. We had been fighting to survive for as long as I could remember. The thought of just stopping. It was like dreaming of a warm bed after years of sleeping on the floor. I wanted it. I wanted it so badly. But then I looked at the journals piled in the footlocker. I thought about Arthur Vance, a dying man, spending his last precious years not preparing for his own end, but building a future for 2 children he'd never get to meet. He had given us more than a choice between money and a fight. He had given us a legacy. He had given us a name, Vance. And that name came with a story of a man who stood up to a powerful corporation. Could we really just take the money and let that story die with him? "He believed in us, Leah," I said softly. "He trusted us to do the right thing." "The right thing is to survive," she shot back, her voice cracking. "We've earned that much, haven't we? To just be safe for once? I'm tired of fighting, Leo. I'm so tired." This was the first time we had ever been truly at odds. Our entire lives, it had been us against the world. Now, for the first time, it was me versus her. The bunker felt smaller, the air thicker. This choice could break us apart. I walked over to the cassette player. I picked up a tape at random. The label just said, May 1998. I popped it in and pressed play. A man's voice filled the bunker. It was older, a little raspy but warm. It was our grandfather. He was talking to another man whose voice was weak and punctuated by coughing. They were talking about their families, their children. They were talking about the strange illnesses that were sweeping through their community. They were scared, but they were determined. "They think we're just going to roll over and die," our grandfather's voice said from the tiny speaker. "They think we're disposable, but they're wrong. The truth has a way of sticking around. You just have to make sure someone's there to tell it." I stopped the tape. The silence that followed was different. It was filled with the voice of a ghost who was asking us for help. I looked at Leah. The fight had gone out of her eyes, replaced by the same sorrow and resolve I felt in my own chest. We didn't need to say anything else. We both knew. There was no real choice. Not for us. We were Vances, and Vances didn't run. We found the safety deposit box key, just as he said, but we also found a small stash of cash in a waterproof pouch at the bottom of the footlocker. About $2,000, with a note that said, "For getting started, whichever path you choose." It was enough. We spent the next 2 days in the bunker, organizing. We used our phones to take pictures of every single page of his journals, every document, creating a digital backup. We listened to the tapes, taking careful notes. It was a crash course in our own history and in the crimes of Northfield development. The story they told was horrifying. A cover-up that spanned decades. With our grandfather's get-started money, we bought bus tickets to the town where the bank was. We also bought a cheap burner laptop and a handful of USB drives. In the bank, we didn't just empty the safety deposit box. We rented a new one under a false name and put the original journals, tapes, and documents inside. We kept the backups with us. The original evidence was too precious to carry. The money our grandfather had left was more than I could have imagined. It wasn't millions, but it was enough. Enough to disappear forever if we had wanted to. We took out a small portion, just enough to live on for a few months, and left the rest. That wasn't our money. It was justice money. It was the war chest. From a motel room 2 towns over, we began our fight. We were terrified. We were 2 kids with a laptop and a pile of evidence against a multi-billion-dollar corporation. We started by researching lawyers. We needed someone who wasn't afraid, someone who specialized in environmental law and had a history of taking on corporate giants. We found him, a man named Ben Carter, who ran a small non-profit law firm out of the state capital. His website was filled with stories of fighting for farmers, for small towns, for people poisoned by corporate negligence. He was perfect. I spent a whole day drafting an email to him. I kept it anonymous. I told him we had incontrovertible proof of a decades-long cover-up by Northfield Development, related to their operations at a former military base. I attached one single damning document, an internal memo from a Northfield executive from 1987, explicitly ordering the deep burial of contaminated materials to avoid regulatory oversight. I hit send, my heart hammering against my ribs. For 2 days, we heard nothing. We started to lose hope. Maybe he thought it was a prank. Maybe he was too busy. Maybe he was on their payroll. Then, on the 3rd day, my burner phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered, my hand shaking. "Am I speaking with the person who sent me an email regarding Northfield Development?" a man's voice asked. It was calm, professional, and deadly serious. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "My name is Ben Carter," he said. "I think you and I need to have a conversation. A long one." That phone call was the beginning of the next chapter of our lives. We met with Ben in a series of clandestine meetings in quiet diners and parks. He was a tall, tired-looking man with kind eyes and a will of iron. At first, he was cautious, but as we showed him more of the evidence, we saw a fire light up in his face. He knew what this was. This was the case of a lifetime. He agreed to represent us, pro bono. The fight was long and brutal. Ben filed a massive lawsuit on behalf of the estate of Arthur Vance and other affected families. Northfield's legal team was a swarm of expensive suits. They filed motion after motion to have the case dismissed. They claimed the evidence was fabricated. They tried to paint our grandfather as a disgruntled employee with a grudge. They hired private investigators to find us. We had to keep moving, staying in cheap motels, always paying in cash, never staying in one place for more than a week. There were times when Leah and I almost broke. The pressure was immense. The fear was a constant companion. One evening, a man in a nice suit knocked on our motel room door. He said he was a land surveyor for a telecom company, but his questions were all about the old military base and whether we knew anyone who used to live in the area. We didn't answer. We just packed our bags and were gone within 10 minutes. That was the moment we knew they were hunting us. They knew someone was out there, and they were getting close. But we had Ben, and we had our grandfather's voice on the tapes, a constant reminder of what we were fighting for. Ben managed to find other families, children and grandchildren of Arthur's colleagues who had also died of rare cancers. Our lawsuit grew into a class action. The story started to leak to the press. A small independent journalist got a hold of it and wrote a scathing exposé. Suddenly, Northfield wasn't just fighting 2 kids and a lawyer. They were fighting public opinion. The legal battle dragged on for nearly 2 years. 2 years of living in the shadows. But we were growing up. We were learning about the law, about strategy, about resilience. Leah got her GED online. I took online courses in paralegal studies. We weren't just the subjects of the case anymore. We were active participants. We knew our grandfather's evidence better than anyone. Finally, the week before the trial was set to begin, Northfield blinked. Their lawyers called Ben with a settlement offer. It wasn't the public trial and conviction we had dreamed of. They would not have to admit guilt, but the terms were significant. They would establish a multi-million-dollar compensation fund for all the families of the affected workers. They would pay for a full environmental cleanup of the Custer County site. And they would abandon their plans for the resort development, selling the land they had acquired to a state conservation trust. Ben advised us to take it. He said a trial was risky, that a jury could be swayed. This settlement was a concrete victory. It was justice. Maybe not perfect poetic justice, but real, tangible justice that would help dozens of families and save a piece of the wilderness. We talked about it for a long time, Leah and me, and we agreed. We took the deal. Our fight was over. The day the settlement was finalized, Leah and I drove back to Custer County. We had a reliable used car now, and enough money in our bank account to live comfortably. We drove down that same gravel road we had walked down 2 years before. We climbed the hill to our bunker. The steel door was just as we had left it. We opened it up, and that same cold, timeless air washed over us. But this time, it didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a beginning. In the years that followed, we honored our grandfather's legacy. We used a portion of our settlement money to start a small foundation that provides legal aid to whistleblowers in environmental cases. We helped other people fight their own Northfields. And we built a home. We hired a contractor who specialized in unconventional architecture. He helped us make the bunker livable. We cut a window into the hillside, letting in natural light for the first time. We installed solar panels on the hill for power, a sophisticated water catchment and filtration system for water, and a satellite dish for internet. We furnished the small space simply. It wasn't big, but it was ours. We owned it, free and clear. No one could ever kick us out. I'm 24 now. Leah is 22 and in college, studying environmental science. She comes home on weekends and holidays. Sometimes, on clear nights, we sit on the hill above our strange little home, the only light for miles coming from our own window, and we look up at the stars. We talk about our grandfather. We never met him, but I feel like I know him. We are living the future he built for us. We chose the long road home, and it led us right here. Inheritance, I've learned, is a funny thing. We thought we had nothing, but we were wrong. We inherited a name. We inherited a story. We inherited a moral compass that pointed us toward a difficult, necessary fight. Our grandfather didn't leave us a fortune. He left us a choice. And in making that choice, we found not just justice for him, but a future for ourselves. We found a home, not in a building, but in a purpose. We took the legacy of a quiet, forgotten man and made it loud enough for the whole world to hear. So that's our story. It began on a curb with nothing but a trash bag of belongings and a world of uncertainty ahead. It led us down a dark set of stairs into the heart of a secret. It taught us that family is more than blood. It's the love that's strong enough to reach across time. It taught us that home isn't always 4 walls and a roof. Sometimes it's a promise you keep. Sometimes it's a piece of ground you refuse to give up, a place where you finally stop running and decide to stand and fight. If our story resonated with you, If you've ever had to fight for your own place in the world, or for a truth that needed to be told, I want you to hit that subscribe button and become part of this community. We believe that everyone has a story that matters, and this is a place where those stories are honored. And please, in the comments below, I want you to tell me one thing you've learned in your own life about the true meaning of home. It doesn't have to be a long story, just a thought. Your perspective is valuable. Your story matters. And I promise you, I read every single comment. Thank you for listening.